Hello again, everyone. It's Bob Pulver. In this episode, I am joined by not one but two super smart guests. Arthur Tisi is a former musician and music producer turned IT executive and serial entrepreneur. And Dr. Harold Goldstein is a professor of industrial organizational psychology at Baruch College, part of the City University of New York, and chief psychology officer at Hunova, a talent insights startup which Arthur founded. The three of us explore the intersection of AI and psychometric assessments in the workplace. We discuss the importance of using multiple data sources for a holistic view of individuals, the need for validity in assessments, and the potential of AI to provide deep insights into personalities and behavior. Arthur and Harold advocate for a holistic and personalized approach to talent acquisition, optimizing existing talent, and fostering intellectual curiosity and interdisciplinary collaboration to enhance AIQ and career development. I hope you enjoy the discussion, and thanks for tuning in.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Elevate Your AIQ. I'm your host, Bob Pulver. Today, I have the pleasure of speaking with two super smart gentlemen, Arthur Tisi and Dr. Harold Goldstein. Welcome, gentlemen.
Good to be here.
Hello, this is Arthur. How are you?
Great. Really excited to talk to you guys today. Why don't we do intros? Harold, do you want to start?
Sure. My name's Harold Goldstein. I'm an industrial organizational psychologist, which just means I'm a psychologist that studies people in the workplace. Primary focus that I look at is assessment of psychological capabilities, talent in work organizations. I'm on the faculty at Baruch College, City University in New York, past 25 years. And I also work at Hunova, which is an AI-focused company that Arthur started up.
Excellent. And Arthur?
Hey, so I'm Arthur Tisi and started out as a CIO, CTO, and then became a CEO. I've worked in various size companies from very large publicly traded to smaller startups. I'm currently the founder of Hunova, which is a company focused on building an understanding of who people are based on their language with Harold and his team and others. 2014, we started that. And most recently, also a co-founder and advisor to a company called BaseForge. And BaseForge is focused on providing AI advisory to companies in various forms outside of what we do with Hunova.
Awesome. Yeah, I remember, Arthur, when we first met, I think you were at Fairway, a supermarket in New York, for those not familiar. But I was at IBM at the time, connecting C-suite clients like yourself to IBM Research, and I think some of that, that's where I got exposed to social analytics and some of the things that we'll, I'm sure, get into today. But it was fascinating to see how we're able to sort of interrogate, all that unstructured data floating out in social media and elsewhere, and try to derive insights from that. So I think that's just as relevant today, and certainly part of the conversation, and how AI sort of intersects with that is important these days.
I when you mention that, I actually think about that. So a couple of things that were really helpful to me there. First, it was my real first deep introduction to private equity, right? Fairway was a private equity held company. So that has really served us. It helped me then. It was a long time ago, but it also served me in my ability to understand how PEs work. And we're doing a lot of that work with BaseForge and Hunova now. But secondly, a kind of fun fact was the two people that were at the forefront of IBM Watson at the time, because I spent a lot of time with IBM Research, were Dr. Brenda Dietrich and Rama Akkaraju. Rama they're both good friends, and Rama is now the head of AI, or she has a very senior role at NVIDIA, the VP of AI and some aspect of AI there. And then, Brenda went on after leaving IBM. They both became IBM fellows, and they were the ones who really introduced me to the potential for natural language processing tied to behavior with the first version of IBM Watson Personality Insights, which was in I don't know, 2012. So it's been a minute.
It certainly has. Yes, I remember Brenda and Rama very well. I didn't realize she was at NVIDIA. That's a pretty exciting place to be right now.
Yeah, she's doing great. She's doing awesome.
Yeah, excellent. So one of the things that, as we saw some of this evolve, I think Personality Insights, it actually had a pretty good run, but my understanding is they shut it down a while back. But that's one of the things, I guess, Harold, I wanted to ask you about when we think about how to actually do assessments. I mean, I'm guessing, most IO psychologists don't think too highly of personality tests as opposed to other ways of sort of assessing someone's potential or their, skills and competencies and things like that. So what's your sort of hot take on that?
Yeah, I don't think I would say that in all honesty, meaning that, the only way to understand human beings because of how in depth they are and is to kind of look at them in all different ways. So personality tests can give you some insights into different capabilities as long as they're valid, as long as they're predictive of the things you're trying to understand. But I just would never stop there. But why use one tool when you got to use multiple tools? Only because humans are so complicated. So traditional personality tests. We had some trouble because we were looking at dysfunctional personality tests initially, like particularly in the 60s, early 70s. And we kind of shut that kind of research down. But that was a mistake. The mistake was, shutting it down rather than shifting to things that are job relevant. So I like the use of personality tests if you focus on how they're job relevant. How well do they predict how you're going to behave and perform in a work organization? Then they can give you great insight. Combined with other pieces of information that you can gather in all different ways. I think the excitement around AI is really that it's another tool and a really special tool, apparently, it's looking like, that can help us really gather deep insight. So that's kind of how I'd frame that, in my reaction.
Yeah, I guess, when we looked at, because Personality Insights, not to completely focus on IBM Watson and what they did, but I think when you apply that type of analytics against what you see in someone's sort of social exhaust, right, in their social media, that's not necessarily, personality can be contextual is what I would say, right? So what the personality that you exhibit on social media, broadcasting to the planet is not necessarily how you would behave in a work, context. And so it's fine if you want to target people from a sort of microsegmentation perspective with marketing, but that's not necessarily something that you would use for. It's not data from those sources that you would use in a work context or in a work evaluation or in a hiring process.
Well, here's what I would say about that. I mean, when you look at what Personality Insights was at IBM, and part of the reason we started Unova is because there was a general sense at IBM, and I won't name the people, but there was a general sense that what Watson was doing initially wasn't really getting to the heart of the matter of things. And so when they trained largely on social data. And I think that was one of the challenges to minimizing some bias and getting some more signal, right? So I think if you have a little more of a robust approach, and that's really where Unova started, is where Personality Insights ended, right? We were just like, we can't use Personality Insights as it was configured. And even Personality Insights went from one kind of model around Pennebaker, linguistic inquiry, word count, to something other than that based on vector space. But the thing was that, if you do train on what we do, right? They only trained in one way, but what we do is we train on an ensemble of different variables and an ensemble of different technological approaches. Then you can approximate something that can be used around vector analysis and different transformer models to get to something that comes across much more consistently in terms of understanding who an individual is based on their social, right? What what IBM did was they trained only on Twitter, right, at a time where it was a very different context. And what they did was they took a traditional psychological test, which was a short form personality test of, I think, of 140 questions. And then they basically took the Twitter and they put the two things together. It was very crude as an instrument. At the time, it was innovative and almost revolutionary, but it was kind of crude. And what we've done is expand that based on the type of instrument we use, the type of questions we ask, the type of the varying models we use, the way we roll up these subtraits and different things into with the help of IO psychologists to deliver something that allows you to enable an understanding of signal in a business setting. So although I would agree with you that initially the approach that they took would not be relevant, then as we've kind of enhanced and refined this with Harold and his team and our team of AI engineers, we've gotten to something where we have much stronger correlations based on what we refer to as validity. So that's like, okay, here's what we said about this person based on perhaps social, or based on perhaps what they wrote, or based on perhaps what they say in their email, or based on perhaps what we're doing on this Zoom call now or whatever, and taking that text. But then saying, here's what we think that person is. And then over time, looking at that person in the organization to say, you know what we said about this person is right. It's kind of like, yeah, we think this person's going to be a 300 hitter in the major leagues, and they're going to have X number of at-bats a year. And it kind of turns out to be the correlation between that. Most times the person's between 275 and 325. So that's a pretty good estimate and accurate analysis of who that person is in the workforce.
What other data sources are you or were you collecting to sort of augment, some of the original sources, right? Because I imagine, again, not to keep bringing up IBM, but they were pretty ahead of most companies doing social listening externally and internally. Certainly from a data privacy standpoint, you want to be sensitive to, maybe what people are saying. I recall some of the applications had specific automatic, stop words or exclusions for certain contexts. If there was any, personally identifiable information, if there was any sensitivity to the context or the data source. But I guess where I'm going is, if you complement what people share socially plus external, maybe open source, resources, whether it's, I don't know, Reddit, or I'm not sure who has what, data available to be, interrogated. But it seems like the more sources, both internal and external, that you can gather data from, the more complete, a picture you have of how someone operates and thinks.
I mean, I agree. Multiple approaches is the way to go. I mean, what you're saying is, well, first of all, you want a holistic view of the person. If the one thing about IBM was it was a partial view through the personality lens. There's nothing wrong with that, though. It just needs to keep going. So it wasn't wrong. It was just an initial take. To the extent you can look at a holistic set of capabilities, you'll get a better sense of how people will behave, because people use different capabilities in combination to, behave in a similar manner and achieve the same things. So you've got to think about that aspect of complexity. One thing Arthur and I have talked about a lot is don't over rely on one approach. So if IBM was built around a big five model of personality and as Arthur was saying, a traditional light test to measure that, and then they triangulated the text analysis off of that, you want to augment that with additional ways of measuring individual talent and then look for convergence. So you want to try biodata approaches, various cognitive approaches, then triangulate this together so that you get something. It's going to be a more resilient measure, that captures the person. And then Arthur's, very big, and I'm very big on validity, which is you do this and then you need to make sure it worked. And that's absolutely critical. If not, it's kind of mystery. It's that black box without showing that it actually connects to behavior, and that the behavior then connects to outcomes, because that's what a workplace is going to worry about. They're going to want to know, how are you going to behave? And then how's that going to translate into outcomes? And the main thing is to mesh together valid sources, right? So as long as you're not putting junk in, and you check to see how it contributes to understanding human behavior and projecting what a human being can do, it's exciting. And to the extent that AI helps us do that, it's a great use of the tool, I think.
So one of the things that has come up a lot in terms of talent acquisition is explicit responses to questions in an assessment versus implicit data that you collect. And if someone's responding to your particular assessment, isn't there already some, their own biases, I guess, play into how they respond to those questions, because they could always be just responding in a way that they think giving you the answers that you want to hear, or just not being the most truthful. And I think that was one of the advantages of gathering some of that social exhaust, because it's just natural. It's already out there and you're not responding to anything. It's just being sort of interpreted. And maybe you didn't anticipate that when you first, tweeted or put something up on LinkedIn or what have you. But I guess just trying to unpack the explicit versus implicit sort of data and how that plays into all of this.
Well, here's what I would say from an AI perspective, and then I'll have Harold talk about traditional inventories and bias. Whether it's social media, whether it's our discussion via YouTube where we collect that audio and convert it to text, or whether it's open-ended questions, I think the most important thing to do, and there's two pieces, right? There's training, which is completely separate from kind of assessing somebody based on their language in one setting or another. One of the things that we've found to be important is to avoid specific, to the extent that you can with a client, avoid specific open-ended questions that would lead them to feel like they have to answer in a certain way. So tell us about, how was your summer? What's your favorite band? What do you like to do? Much more engaging kind of thing than saying, tell us the one time that you had a transformative experience managing an employee, right? From an open-ended perspective using AI, the correlations between one form of question versus another with regard to context are pretty much similar, right? So now, there are specific questions you might want to ask about somebody having been a salesperson as a hunter or a farmer, and there may be specific questions you want to ask related to that role. And what's interesting is, maybe you ask those questions in an open-ended way using AI. Maybe you use a traditional approach to those questions on a scale of 1 to 5, if you have to, because, on these Likert type of answers, you can ask the same question 5 times to kind of get out of somebody having a particular bias. But to the extent that you can use language and open-ended text, the manner with which you ask those questions, particularly if you ask them in a kind of non-threatening way, is much more helpful. And you actually get more insight based on people just riffing about their ability to have an impact on a particular role than you do asking them a question related to a particular role. On the AI side, I think Harold, the esteemed Dr. Goldstein, will have a different, I think the literature says something different about traditional psychological inventories, and pass that off to Harold.
No, I think Arthur's hitting on key points. But look, if you're trying to assess talent, having it all be transparent is problematic anyway, right? Meaning, you don't want people to be able to know what the answer is, and then they just parrot that answer back to you, whether it's interview questions, standardized test questions, et cetera. So you always don't want it to be transparent what the answer is. I think one of the things about allowing people to speak openly gives them kind of an open space where they can express themselves. But AI is then going to take algorithms and help us determine, different aspects of this person and assess their talent. So it's a complex question around the ethics of it. Is there ethical problems with gathering data that somebody expressed in digital exhaust, but they didn't know would be used to assess them for a job? I mean, that's a question we have to ask, versus when they're applying for a job, how transparent does the question have to be? Because I'll also tell you, the more transparent it is, the less valid it's going to be from that standpoint. So it's a balancing act. I mean, it's clearly a balancing act in terms of looking at that.
And what I would say also is, even if you look at some AI companies that we all know of, and I will remain nameless, not Unova, particularly those that kind of herald this idea of multimodal AI. If you go online and look at the top 3 perceived leaders in the AI talent analysis space that have hundreds, if not thousands of customers, and you go onto YouTube, it'll tell you how to answer those questions. And that's an AI company. Now, what that tells you is the way they trained is not the proper way to train for this transformative approach to AI. But what they've done is they still are looking at questions and results based a little bit more on sentiment and keywords than the type of analysis we do, which I would then argue is more advanced, because it's not about any specific word, right? We don't determine narcissism by you saying I. We don't determine you being more open to experience by saying we, right? There's nothing wrong, particularly with a leader saying I within a certain context. So there's a mathematical calculation around that vector space that might have sounded too complicated. But the point is, a lot of these AI companies that say they're using AI in a particular way, particularly around microgestures, layered voice analysis, and all this other stuff, ultimately are getting to, if you're able to go online and say, this is how you pass this quote unquote AI test, it means it's not approaching it in the way that is using truly advanced AI.
And Arthur's hitting on a point that's a problem with assessment for jobs or for school, getting into schools, which is test prep systems. I mean, that's just a huge problem. The fact that they're migrating over to try and tell you what to do if AI is analyzing your responses just shows that that is the direction that assessment's headed in. But that test prep, the Stanley Kaplan courses, the Princeton reviews, they are a problem because they're a source of bias.
This is William Tincup, and I'd like to direct you to a wonderful limited series podcast that Ryan and I recorded live at the ERE Recruiting Innovation Summit. We sat down with 20 recruiting and TA leaders from around the world to hear what today's best recruiters are doing to stay sharp, stay relevant, and stay ahead. It's called The Talent Shift. You'll love it. You'll find the podcast wherever you get your podcasts. Listen, like, review, share. Do you?
One thing about, that I get excited about in working with Arthur on is, can we get real insights into individuals? Can we really do that so that they can, become what they can become, so that they can reach their potential and achieve the things they want to achieve? But if it's a game to get into a job or get into a school, then the test prep is just a form of bias, which usually helps out people that are of higher socioeconomic status. So it's, that's more of a bias. People get so worried about AI being the bias. I'd be more worried about test prep systems in general, whether it's traditional tests, structured interviews, or just AI as a tool.
I feel like this is all a game, right? And this is all, everyone's trying to get just that little incremental, sort of advantage or leverage or whatever it is. And so you're right. I think the higher ed situation is not good. I think the job description to, resume, matching, that's a cat and mouse game as well. It's AI versus AI. It's an AI generated resume against an AI evaluating that resume against an AI generated, job description. I mean, I don't feel like we're fixing the fundamental problem.
But we could, but I agree with you completely. I know Arthur's on the same page with that.
The other challenge on the talent acquisition side is I think we're relying, I feel like companies are relying too much on active versus passive candidates. And if you want to cast as wide a net as possible, I mean, you could argue that everyone is a passive candidate. So why are you spending so much money on programmatic advertising, hoping that the right people happen to see your job post and happen to respond so quickly that they have a shot at moving to the next phase, where instead, if you knew enough about these candidates, you could do a much better job targeting the right people in the first place, have a much higher quality versus quantity funnel, and you would streamline, these traditional recruiting metrics around, time to hire, time to fill, things like that, but also increase your quality of hire, however you're measuring quality of hire, assuming that you are. You've got plenty of qualified people out there, and you're just doing the same thing, thinking you're going to get a better result. It's kind of infuriating, actually.
Well, I mean, here, like, think about it this way, right? If you're married, does it make sense that you're constantly out there looking for somebody else, or do you kind of build a base of knowledge around an individual? So here's what, with the Base Forge side of our business, we work with all kinds of companies, and one set of companies we work with is are focused on sales pipeline. And what we're learning is that, and it's just baked into some kind of ethos largely around the heads of sales, that it just seems like it's better to be illusory around bringing in a new customer than it is to grow the existing base. And so a lot of times we have companies that say, if we could just grow our existing base by 10%, that means X. And yet that seems almost like an innovative approach, in the same way that you create this feeding frenzy around all of these people that are going to try to apply for a job. They're going to be absolutely disappointed. They're going to spend hours applying, and then at the end of the day, they get ghosted, or they don't hear back, or whatever. And I mean, there are statistics out there that say 90%, 80% of employees inside an organization would be willing to share more information if it would benefit them personally. The challenge is that sometimes in organizations you have these 360 reviews that are the exact opposite value, because it's basically, hey, Bob, you're working for me, I work for Harold, let's scratch each other's backs. We all scratch each other's backs, and nothing of value comes out. And it may be that the issue is not that I'm not a good employee, it's maybe that I'm not a good employee for Bob, or Bob's not a good partner with me, but in some other part of the organization in the exact same role, it might be entirely different. We all have experiences where we had great experiences with bosses. There's nobody in the world that has said, everybody I've ever worked for is horrible, unless they're a sociopath, right? And most people aren't, right? So there's always somebody that you say, oh man, I had a great experience with that person, and he or she really did a lot for me. Why don't we try to focus more on that and focus less on just going out there and hurting these people? It's like we're herding cattle, but we're just hurting everything. We're just bringing everything in the animal kingdom into our organization, and we're not really focused. It's really irritating, and I think it's creating a scenario where there's going to be a dam that's going to break, and it's intersecting with Gen Alpha, and it's intersecting with Gen Z, where this process intersects with a completely different set of sensibilities around work-life balance, and the whole thing's going to break apart, because they're like, and that's why you see this hybrid work approach. That's why you see people taking on 4 or 5 different tasks and roles that are part of their career, because big organizations are forcing you to capitulate to a type of approach that most people, at least younger people, are not in tune with, right? We grew up in a different way. These people are like, I'm not going to do that. Now, whether that's right or wrong, you're going to kind of wash out these older people that are running these companies. And at some point, things are going to change. And then, of course, all these recruiting people and talent acquisition people are going to either embrace the new approach or they're just going to retire.
I agree with pretty much everything that you just described. And I guess it is frustrating that not enough companies, talent leaders, hiring managers, whoever, are not willing to sort of, experiment at a minimum and try new approaches. I mean, nothing, yes, there's been great, influential sort of voices and leaders in the HR and talent space for a long time, leadership development, in the assessment space and all this. And yet it just seems like we just keep regurgitating some of this and we're not actually using, to the point of this overarching discussion, are we using AI to solve the real problems, or are we just speeding things up and scaling, these biases and these areas that just haven't exhibited progress in the areas that I think it makes sense?
I don't think we're scaling biases. I think we're using AI, which is a tool, to solve the wrong problem, right? Look, in my life, and I'm maybe different than most, or maybe similar, or this will resonate with the audience, I don't know. But in my life, when I want to work with a team, the first principle I think about is who have I worked with in the past that I can put into this and be part of this, because I'm a musician. I know guys that I've quote unquote played with before. I know their approach to the music, or I know their approach to the business. I know how they think. Let me first try to find them. My second principle is, I got 30,000 or 40,000 people that I'm connected to on LinkedIn, or 20,000. I don't even know what it is, but it's tens of thousands. Let me go back to identify people that I've worked with before, or people that I respect that know some people. I never go, okay, I'm going to post a job on LinkedIn to get some strange. I mean, it makes no sense. It makes no sense to me. And I think if that happened more, and you see the schism inside an organization, somebody that's leading an organization is going to try to identify the people they need to work with the most. Like Harold has a team of PhD IO psychologists. They move beautifully together. I have that same benefit in working with people I know. And when they're doing this inside a company, they sometimes have to go through the talent team as a gate, right? But it's not a good gate. And quite frankly, they don't really want to deal with that process, but it's become unwieldy. So maybe for certain entry-level roles, maybe that's great. But once you start getting into something that's a little bit more formidable, even in companies of 100 people, go back to first principles. And then use AI to have a holistic view of how everybody works together, have a little bit of a summary view of that individual and how that person would work within the defined role within the company, but certainly don't use it as a cut score, and at least show the respect to everybody that they all get through the process, and you don't basically go to an ATS, fill out this whole thing, even though they tell you to send up the resume, even though you do all this stuff, then they ask you the same questions. You essentially, like a Luddite, retype your entire resume, which you just sent them, and maybe you paid a company to build this resume, and you paid a company to you give them your LinkedIn profile, all of this stuff, and then you go into this ATS, you fill this whole thing out, it takes an hour and a half, and then you never hear from them.
Looking for the inside scoop on payroll? Whether you're a payroll pro or just curious about your paycheck, we've got two podcasts you cannot miss. It's About Payroll delivers the latest trends for payroll pros, and It's About Your Paycheck is here for employees, breaking down pay and rights in simple terms. Two great shows, two great hosts, and endless insights to keep you informed and empowered. Subscribe now and elevate your payroll knowledge. Brought to you by Work Defined, where payroll meets people.
Welcome to the Human Role. your go-to podcast where HR and payroll collide with innovation. I'm your host, Tiana Neal, and every month I'm diving deep with industry experts and change makers, bringing you real talk insights, practical tips, and fresh takes you won't hear anywhere else. Whether you're a leader, practitioner, or just curious about the latest HR and payroll trends, I've got you covered. Ready to roll with the best? Tune in for fresh perspectives, actionable tips, and the knowledge you need to roll forward with confidence. Subscribe now and let's transform the way you work.
That's not progress, man. That's not progress. Progress for me was when I was a kid, and I know I sound like an old guy now. When I was a kid, I went into the New York Times business section, or at the end of on Sunday, I found 10 jobs. I sent in my letter, and I heard back from 4 of them. Fast, simple, efficient. Now it's just become this thing where technology has become a barrier. And what we're trying to do to minimize bias, which is critical to our core mission, is to have a series of steps to eliminate that part of that, which is providing some enlightenment to the current processes of organizations. And that's why we've become an AI advisory outside of human capital for companies, because they just don't know how to think about AI properly, even if they're implementing it.
Yeah, no, I have the same observations. Everyone's trying to come up with their own shiny object, and it's exactly that. It's just it's bolted on. It's not well thought out. They found a shiny new hammer.
You know, Bob, it's like I told you. It was like, and I know I'm maybe 1 cup of coffee too many in today, but I will tell you this: you are seeing that exact thing again. I put on my AI advisory hat. You're seeing that exact same thing happening with large language models. Large language models have become ketchup. They are ketchup, right? It's not like I'm going to have a turkey sandwich or a roast beef sandwich or a tofu sandwich. It's like whatever it is, I'm going to throw ketchup on it. I'm going to take all my processes and I'm going to throw ketchup on it. I'm going to take the French fries. I'm going to put ketchup on the French fries. Then I'm going to put the French fries and ketchup in a bag. Then I'm going to throw ketchup all over the bag. And, and so what happens is without somebody and nobody's able to kind of look at it that way in a kind of binary way and say, is this the right thing to do with a large language model? Why are we spending so much money trying to do this stuff? Why? It's because we heard ketchup is great, because we heard mayo is great. Like, what are we thinking about here? And I think, and a lot of companies, first principle companies, are asking the question about what do they need, what condiment, and what protein. And other companies are like, yeah, we were supposed to have protein as part of this thing, but we ended up with a bunch of condiments, and now we want to start all over again. You're laughing.
I'm laughing because, first of all, I'm not a big condiment guy, but my wife and I have been binge watching The Bear, and last night's episode from season 1, so hopefully this isn't a spoiler for anybody, but they have to go to their uncle's kid's birthday party, and they bring whole hot dogs and no ketchup. And he's like, well, who puts ketchup on a hot dog? And it's like, kids put ketchup on hot dogs.
Right. And maybe we should move away. Maybe that's a great metaphor, right, for 2 things that came up. One, maybe some more adults in the room so we don't put ketchup on everything. Number 2, part of that episode I remember is he ended up slipping some kind of meds in the food, and all the kids fell asleep. And it's kind of like, maybe we're doing the same thing. We're kind of like tripping on this concept of ketchup in our organizations, and the whole thing makes absolutely no sense. Maybe we should just take that little segment from The Bear and say, you see this? Whatever this is, don't do this.
Right. Don't put ketchup on your,
and
that's the lesson of this episode. Don't put ketchup on your hot dog or things that don't need ketchup, and don't put Xanax in the punch.
Right. Well, and certainly if you're going to put ketchup on your hot dog because you like it, great. But don't put a hot dog in a bag and then throw ketchup all over it. And don't waste the Xanax by sprinkling the top of the bag with Xanax. If you're going to take Xanax, understand why you're taking it. It's not a terrible thing, but at least be mindful of what the Xanax is for, what the ketchup is for, and what a paper bag is for.
Fair enough. So can we go back to something that Harold was hitting on, the comparison of what happens with, sort of this Moneyball, concept and sports analytics compared to strategic workforce planning within an organization. One of my communities who focus on talent intelligence, we're just getting into a whole thing on WhatsApp about this, and trying to compare, I guess, why doing organizational development, strategic workforce planning is more difficult than, Moneyball within sports, and had to do with there's more variables. Sports have rules, they've got salary caps, they've got, but I don't know. I guess I haven't thought deeply enough about it. I know people talk about it all the time. You've got every time you do, scouting, or you've got your farm system, you're trying to find that missing puzzle piece, or maybe a couple missing puzzle pieces to put together, a better, holistic, picture that performs better, of course. And some of those players could move, positions. An infielder maybe moves from third base to shortstop, or someone in right field has to play left because of, injuries or whatever. And so I guess I'm curious to just, Harold, hear your perspective about how you've, approached those scenarios with sports teams, and then with just, regular organizations.
Yeah, we started working with the NFL back in 2012 to bring psychological testing in to kind of raise up that bar, that aspect. That's where they wanted to elevate the game. They felt like it was an area that could be tapped further to have deeper understanding of the athletes psychologically, and look at how that contributes to their performance. Because let's face it, physical is going to be the predominant thing that gets you on the field. But everybody feels like the psychological is why you either overperform or underperform. They brought us in because they thought, well, you can bring this unique perspective, which is, I think, the way you really need to approach these things, which is a multidisciplinary approach. So they said, well, why don't you just bring this in to us and try it, since you've been doing it with, the FBI, with, financial services companies. You've done it there. Why not come do it here? So we were excited to bring our expertise in. And I will get to what you asked, Bob. But what I found interesting after 10 plus years of doing this is how much we learned from the way they approach talent that can be used by regular organizations. And we've actually done a lot of presentations back to large scale corporate organizations, talking about what we've learned from them, which is, number one, we're not measuring performance with as much depth. The amount of data, particularly with NFL, because of the amount of insanity there is of people watching it and creating their own scoring systems, the amount of data that you can get to really understand performance, the amount of depth with which they try to understand what someone can achieve, their focus on development. It was a GM of the Rams that said to us, after we provided test data to them, that basically said, okay, well, these are the guys I picked. Now what do I do with them? Meaning they were, instead of siloing the selection process from the development process, which is ridiculous to do, they were kind of like, all right, well, you must have learned something about them. So what can you do to help us? But I'll say the number one thing that I think corporate America could learn from both sports and the military is to have a sense of urgency about their talent. I mean, it's only sports and the military that actually act like this is a war and that they need to win this war. With the military, it is life and death. With sports, it just feels like life and death. It's what we always say. I mean, it's an interesting thing, but I do think that work organizations need to bring more urgency to this. They need to really think in depth and not just, playing off of what Arthur just talked about. Stop just using ketchup. Stop just using one approach. Stop siloing the data. Think about these people with depth and think about how you can help them. The ones you do hire, how can you help them once they're there? You get this, if you can get a holistic, in-depth view of somebody, you can help them achieve things that they want to achieve. And I think that we need to start thinking more three-dimensionally that way. I think we tend to have these two-dimensional systems. They don't speak to each other. And we don't sit back and go, well, what could we do if we really understood people? What could we do? I mean, we'll look at an IT system and say, what can we do with this IT system? What can we do? What can't we do? What should we upgrade? But we don't think about human beings that way. And maybe some people are a bit averse to thinking of humans that way. But, the term human capital emerged, a couple decades ago, instead of human resources, to basically talk about it as something that's a competitive advantage for work organizations. Just like financial capital is, and so human capital, it's because people are special. They bring certain things to the table, and we should be thinking in more depth about how to measure those things and then use that measurement to help them and the organizations achieve their goals. And I am hopeful that AI is like a critical tool to doing that, but it's just a tool. If we don't step back and say, what are we doing here, and what does our human capital really mean to us, and what do our people mean to us, and how do we want to treat them, and what can they achieve, and how do we integrate them into being a organization that's successful, then it won't matter what tool we use. But if we do think about it more broadly and with more depth that way, then I think AI can be, quite a boost or enhancement to the kinds of things we're doing.
Yeah, I think it also ties back to one of the examples that Arthur gave before around, the working with sales and sales effectiveness and outreach. I mean, it costs you how much more to do, customer acquisition and try to increase your market share, I suppose, as opposed to your wallet share of the customers that you have. And in the same way, why are you not? It's going to cost you, 6x or whatever the stat is to go out and try to start all over again and fish when you already have. There's already fish in the cooler in the boat. Like, why aren't you, trying to develop more on the internal side, identify where that potential is, maybe find where they've got some missing, there's a development opportunity through coaching or, learning or mentorship or, a stretch assignment and all these things that like a talent marketplace may enable if organizations have gone in that direction. But it just seems like if you don't even understand the potential of the people that you have, you're wasting everyone's time, and you haven't optimized the relationship that you have already supposedly invested in, right? So why not just invest a little bit more and move people around, and then we're not even going to have time to get into the whole broader talent ecosystem with freelance and contingent workers or whatever. But if you're going to truly use AI to create an optimal team, you've got to look in 360 degrees to see who might be those position players, and maybe people you only need for a season or a project or what have you. And but you've got to do this with your eyes open, and you've got to be constantly, I think it ties to your urgency point, Harold, you've got to be always looking, how can we get a little bit of better advantage? How are we making sure that we truly understand what people are capable of? Because I mean, I know from personal experience, I've been in positions that were not ideal for me. It wasn't that I didn't have good relationships. It wasn't that I didn't have a good manager. It just.
Hey friends, Marnie Robbins here, host of Vibe Makers, a podcast now on the Work Defined Network. Look, we all know workplace culture doesn't come from a slide deck. Gross. It comes from people. So on Vibe Makers, I talk to the folks shaping the experience of work from the inside out. The HR and people ops folk, founders, leaders, and misfits building culture through small bets, big beliefs, and a whole lot of trial and error. No fluff. Well, maybe a little fluff, but mainly just candid talk about what happens when you stop duct taping your culture together. Come check us out. Listen to Vibe Makers wherever you get your podcasts.
Everything wasn't aligned as optimally as it could have been. But if you don't recognize that and make a new and better decision and make an adjustment, then everybody loses.
Yeah, it's a missed opportunity.
Yeah, I think part of the challenge is, And I see this with our customers on the Hunova side, and I see this on with the NewCo with BaseForge in terms of advisory on AI. Unfortunately, the engagement in AI in a kind of sociological sense for the majority of people in this country happened in November of 2022. That's when OpenAI really came out with ChatGPT. So it's new. And, it's like hair bands. When the first hairband came out, it was awesome. After a while, it got like, oh, we got to do something else. So we're going to move to grunge. And I think there's a little bit of an evolution. And I think there's really a lack of understanding in a lot of organizations about how to use AI, what AI can do, what AI should do, what a correlation is, what you're trying to define by the correlation that somebody gives you, and what your real challenge is. I think people talk a lot about Gen Alpha, they talk about Gen Z, but they don't kind of do this full line. And that's because most people are either 1 foot in the goal or 1 foot in the gutter. And you need people that are kind of like skilled in a lot, right? They have to be somewhat analytical. They have to be also creative, and they also have to be influential in an organization to push against the tide of all the other people that are not. And that's why right now, the progressive companies, which I represent as 25% of the total SMB market, 25% of the Fortune 500 market, aside from what they say, those are the companies that are going to disrupt because they're further ahead and, they have a different approach and they can build an organization. And instead of having 1,000 developers, they can have 100 developers that are enabled by technology to help them do their job, but also enabled by the organization to bring their best out. And I am confident in saying, without kind of having statistics around it, that it represents about 25% of the market. And it's going to take some time. And that's why you see a lot of these companies that are throwing ketchup on everything now, because they really don't have the confidence in their ability to kind of say, we don't need ketchup on that. We need the exact opposite. This is a protein move.
Yeah, you're kind of getting into one of the questions that I ask all my guests, so I'll just ask it to both of you now. Because a lot of what we're trying to do is kickstart people's journey with AI, because it's not going away. It's only going to get more advanced. But I don't want people to feel like, yes, there's a continuum in terms of, your knowledge around, data and analytics and insight and how, algorithms and then AI. And for most people, they're not going to get into the AI, the IBM Watson kind of AI, predictive operational AI, those kinds of things. But a lot of that earlier generation of AI is actually where I think people are not using it to their advantage in things like strategic workforce planning. I mean, some of this is around not just like the what if scenarios, but like known unknowns, like what's missing and what's missing that will elevate my confidence level in this prediction such that I'm going to be a better decision support, mechanism. But I think for the average person, whether you're a knowledge worker, you're on the, front line, you're someone who's not on the, you're a deskless worker, AI is going to affect everyone to varying degrees and at varying speeds, I'll say, depending on, where companies and where industries start to apply this technology. And there's, it causes impact to the labor market. But for the average person, the title of this podcast, Elevate Your AIQ, is really for broad audiences to say, what do I need to know to be comfortable moving forward with my career? Because AI is going to be there, whether it's using copilots or agents or GPTs, or it's automating, workflows and things like that. So I guess the question to you guys is, when you hear that phrase, elevate your AIQ, and you think about some of the ways in which we all need to sort of upskill ourselves. I mean, what advice do you have, or what comes to mind as key for people who are not, technical and, don't need to know all the, data sciencey kinds of pieces to this. They just want to know, how do they continue on their current trajectory, either, upskilling or perhaps opportunities to reskill with AI.
Yeah. I mean, it's a good question. I always say be intellectually curious. I always talk about that in that, don't hide from it. Be intellectually curious and intersect with people from other functions and other disciplines, because that is where you'll be able to see where what you're doing fits, and you'll be able to contribute from your perspective to it. So, I always say to Arthur, what's always great is I don't know the ins and out details of the AI. I don't know the coding. I don't come from that world. Hopefully, I'm bringing something from a different world to that, and he and his teams are bringing back the other things, and from that the synergy occurs. And I think that synergy will help the individual, because I know it helps me think about this stuff and get immersed in it and come up with ideas. And hopefully it helps the organization as well, the organizations you become a part of or contribute to. And so I would just say that it's almost that openness, intellectual curiosity, and then intersecting with other perspectives, disciplines, functions in an organization. That's how it'll integrate. That's how AI will integrate in a productive way, both for the individual and the organization.
Yeah, I mean, I would really second exactly what Harold said about curiosity, but I would also approach it with skepticism from the standpoint of how you engage with people in terms of an organization's AI readiness. Now, that's not to say that you have to be prepared and culturally aligned throughout the organization for this new innovative adoption. But if you're not, then you have to trust somebody who's not a poser. And there are a lot of posers out there now that have not had experience in past business intelligence or analytics, and they kind of are into AI. They don't understand AI at a spiritual level. So if you're somebody that's intellectually curious and you're dealing with a poser, you just got to have your spidey senses on to know that you're dealing with a poser, right? I mean, it's like hair bands. I go back to hair bands. There were a ton of hair bands, but really there were only like one or two that made it out of hairband status. I mean, I only think about Guns N' Roses, like that came up in that era, or like in glam. Like there were a million bands in glam in the 70s, but really the only person that came out of it really was David Bowie, right? So it's like, now I'm not saying the statistics are that bad, but I think part of being intellectually curious about the technology is being intellectually curious about the people that you associate with in terms of this journey, whether it's inside an organization or whether it's the colleagues that you work with, in terms of their intellectual curiosity, their openness, and recognizing that you don't need the whole organization to buy into this new thing. You just need enough people to buy into this where you can put up a prototype and deliver something that's impactful to the business, that is not glorious, but you can deliver some ROI in a short period of time and dispense with all this fear that AI is going to replace everything, and that you're going to have, like, you don't have to all like buy the latest Ray Kurzweil book and be worried about the future of how long we're going to live, right? It's just start to work with people that that they're not a second, third, or fourth derivative guy that's growing his hair and he's going to be in a hairband, but that there's some original thinking there, and you're going to approach it in an original way. And it's almost like That's what's happening right now. That's why only 25% of the people are thinking about this kind of technology in a democratic way, as opposed to thinking about it as this kind of forced socialist approach that's going to eliminate everybody. And it's because there's a lot of fear, there's a lot of apprehension, and there are a lot of charlatans out there selling snake oil that have no idea. But in the realm of the blind, the one-eyed man is king, and there's a bunch of one-eyed men walking around telling companies what to do. I mean, if you look at the biggest companies, look at McKinsey, look at BCG, look at all of these companies, you will find that you're getting fourth level expertise to deliver solutions right now, because the most senior people in the organization they can talk about it from a Gartner perspective, but they don't really own it. And it's kind of like a guy that was a jazz musician growing his hair long and changing his guitar from a Gibson jazz guitar to some kind of Fender Strat or whatever, just to kind of redo his vibe. And that's not what this is about. This is transformative. And you would have never thought this would have happened in the Industrial Revolution, but it is happening now. And we got to move toward the fact that somebody knows what a combustion engine is and how it really works and how it can be applied to everything from a tractor to a lawnmower to a cotton gin. And I think it's going to take some time, but there are these people, and we shouldn't be afraid of them, and we should embrace them, and their ideas are different, and their lifestyle is different, and that's how you're going to have success. And the organizations that do that now, they're going to be able to compete with 100 people against companies that have been in this space for 20 years and can't get out of their own way, and that's where you're going to see a ton of this disruption in the Fortune 500. You're going to see a ton. I mean, look at NVIDIA. NVIDIA is basically crushing everything, right? There are a ton of Fortune 500 companies that don't have trillions of dollars of valuation. And there are going to be a lot of new companies that come out and say, yeah, I could name that tune in 3 notes. I don't have to be sitting here doing this for 20 years, and now I'm going to have to reinvent myself.
I love the passion, Arthur. I love the perspective. I agree. I think, the skepticism, I want people to not treat AI like a calculator as well. So I want people to be not skeptical of the results, but it's sort of trust but verify kind of situation, right? Like, just don't take the results, blindly. Certainly don't submit things without editing it if you've used AI to help you sort of draft some copy or resume, cover letter, things like that. It sounds like a computer wrote it.
I was talking to Harold today about this, and I was saying that the thing about large language models, whichever one you use, is if you understand the subject matter. I mean, really what large language models do well for you is not to make you appear to be a lawyer if you're not. But if you're a lawyer and you understand the subject matter, then ask OpenAI to be an assistant to you, and you say, I'm trying to write an employment contract. I need to include these things in it. By the way, those things are specific to an employment contract content. That's where it helps. Otherwise, it does come out sounding insanely high level, very general, and you can see it a mile away. But if we were to take a step back, Bob, to where we started this around human capital, I mean, what we do at Unova from a minimizing bias perspective, to your point of trusting, but verifying, is we maintain a focus on what our AI, on the contexts for how AI can help correct for bias. And then there's a process that you have to kind of establish and sustain to test for that, right? I mean, it's amazing how many organizations blame AI for bias, but their process without AI is so inherently biased, right? It's like, hey, Bob, you're a musician? Oh, I'm a musician. Yeah, I like Bob. It's like, hey, you went to Dartmouth, I went to Dartmouth, not to criticize Dartmouth, but, oh, and you played lacrosse and I played lacrosse? That's great. Or hey, my name's Joseph, your name's Jose, I don't like that. The third piece is just have some fact-based conversations with the stakeholders so they understand this human bias, right? Because there's so much, to your point earlier, Bob, about tests and the way people approach answering the questions in a way based on selection bias, or how organizations really do hire now. And by the way, even how they use AI as a form of a cut test, which is not what it should be. Then have some kind of experts, but have the kind of experts that, again, they're people that you trust. Sustain this investment in the bias research, right? Once you get past this notion of how much bias there could be and how much bias there doesn't necessarily have to be if you train things properly, and then commit to how you collaborate and promote this AI. And that really is, if you use that as a framework, that's AI readiness in an organization, at least applied to how you go about using AI in terms of talent acquisition and team analysis. And once you've done those 6 things, you can apply that to all sorts of things. It doesn't just have to be the top of the funnel.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think it's, even inside the organization, one of the things I was thinking about before was, in terms of leadership development, like if you're looking for people who are the best people for, a certain career development program, who are, how are you identifying, top talent? And a lot of organizations are underfunding learning and development even today, and they may be focusing on just those people who have the most potential to be, future leaders. But I think similar to the situation with higher education, I mean, isn't the whole point to identify, hidden and untapped potential in the rest of the organization, which is, 95% of the organization? Isn't the whole point to give them the opportunities to identify where their hidden potential exists, so that you have a much healthier, pipeline of talent to drive your strategy long term? I mean, to me, that's, everyone should be looking for this sort of win-win relationship, and that's why it's frustrating when I hear people are literally using AI to complete a behavioral assessment. It's like, which part of this is confusing to you? Like, we want to know how your human brain works. We know you're going to be working with AI. Everyone's going to be working with AI in short order. I want to know how this is humans plus AI, not AI plus humans. So
yeah, it's what we refer to as augmented intelligence, not artificial intelligence.
Exactly. So
Harold and I talk all the time about how companies go out to the university, like the biggest universities, I won't name them, but the enormo universities, and they try to recruit there, when 20 miles to the right is an organization that's a mirror university where you can find that kind of talent. It's the same thing inside an organization where you focus on these key people, but in the next building, there are these people that you could engage. I mean, Harold's, we talk about that all the time.
Because they're restricting their pipeline. I mean, they're restricting the group that they're considering, and they could find talent all over the place instead of just in a very narrow place. When you find when you use narrow systems that way, there's an incredible amount of homogeneity within those systems, and that can be destructive to the organization. I mean, everybody talks about diversity because they're talking about race and gender, but the fact is diversity of experience, thought, and capability is critical. And if not, you're putting all your cards down on one answer and hoping that the world doesn't keep changing. So I always say it's like, when you have homogenous talent within your organization, they could all be out of Harvard. It's fine, but you're hoping that one answer is going to work, rather than diversity intermixing to create synergy is what you're losing, So I think that's a way to think about it, at least.
It's funny how Harold talks about that. And I think about the one sector that has for the longest time been able to adopt a strategy around Columbia Law, Harvard Law, are law firms, right? You just hire all these people, but you know what's happening now? The whole thing is changing. The whole thing is changing because these partners are becoming salespeople. They're not, right? And they're delegating to people who are doing the work, and the work is being done in a very different way. And so over time, you're going to need less people on the masthead from these big law school machines, and more people, and it's the same thing that's happening in financial services, and more people from other types of schools. I don't want to, it might sound like a pejorative if I name another school that I think has more ability to influence things positively, but they're not these Ivy League schools. You're seeing this whole thing change, right? So if it's changing in law and it's changing in finance, it's going to change everywhere. It's just we're at this 25% mark.
Think about it like this. Why do you diversify your financial capital, but you don't diversify your human capital? I mean, there's a reason you do diversification when you invest, right? Because things change and you need to be able to roll with that turbulence and continue to excel. Why wouldn't you do diversification of human capital? You know, do you believe that there's one bet you should put down and that the world, which is an open system and constantly changing, is never going to change? It does change. You know, we always talk about it with, like, you know, you were bringing up sports in the NFL, that there's these rules. Well, they change those rules. So if you get very fast receivers who are not physical, and they change the rule where the D-backs can grab and push and pull without the refs throwing a flag, you're going to be in trouble. But if you have some people who are also a little bit bigger and stronger and can push back, you can roll with those turbulence of the changing rules. Now think about the business world. The business world, the rules are constantly changing. The world's changing. So why wouldn't, you know, just like you would diversify the kind of products you create, you diversify your financial capital. You know, I never hear people talk about diversification of human capital, but it's a mistake. Now, that doesn't mean mixing good and poor people. You know, it doesn't mean taking poor talent. It just means you want people with different strengths and makeup to combine together because of the synergy, but also because the rules change, things shift.
That ties to the Moneyball for HR concept, right? I think that's a perfect note to end on, gentlemen. Arthur, Harold, I have really enjoyed this conversation. We could undoubtedly keep talking for much longer, but I'm going to wrap us up for now. This was my first attempt at having multiple guests in the studio, and between the engaging conversation and the banter between the two of you, I consider it a success. Thanks again for making time for me and for our listeners to chat about these critical topics.
No, I've really enjoyed it also. It's always good to kind of toss all this around, and makes you think of new things, and hopefully moves the science forward, you know?
Yeah, I would say hopefully moves the science forward, and also promotes an attitudinal shift based on awareness. You know, sometimes you're so close to something that you have this kind of myopia, and, you know, sometimes taking a step back and just thinking about some of these metaphors really can help people.
Absolutely agree with those closing thoughts, guys. Thank you, Harold, Arthur. This was great. Thank you again to our listeners as well for tuning in. I hope this was insightful. I'm confident that it was. Until next time, thank you again.
All right, take care. Good meeting you, Bob. Take care, Arthur. I'll talk to you later.
Hi, bye, Harold. Thanks, guys.